Good morning. Well, certainly we are happy to kick off our third morning of the National Action Network National Convention, and we are very honored to have a kickoff speaker that all of us know and love for her fight for people that need someone to stand up against those corporate giants who feel that we are to be maneuvered and manipulated rather than share in the wealth of the country. Elizabeth Warren has been a fearless advocate on behalf of not only consumers, but those that are downtrodden and mistreated all over this country, and a dependable voice. And that is why we wanted her to be here. She said, Reverend Al, I'm running for re-election in Massachusetts, but I'm in Washington doing my job, but I'll drop by because I respect National Action Network, and I told her we respect her. And I want people to know that are watching that she's derided by the president because she stands up for all of us. You can judge your friends by who their enemies are. And he tries to deride her, calling her Pocahontas, but to us, she's Sister Popo. So it is my honor to bring a fighter for justice and fairness, consumer rights, and criminal justice rights, the senator from Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
To be here, and thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for that terrific introduction. You know, I want to start this morning by saying something very personal about Reverend Sharpton. Back during the build-up to the 2008 financial crash that wiped out so many families across this country, the Reverend called out what was going on. And he gave me lots of chances to talk about it, other people, and he kept calling it out right up until the time of the crash. And then when I worked for President Obama to set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Reverend was one of its strongest supporters. He was out there every day for this. And now, down in Washington, when we're doing everything we can to defend President Obama's legacy, the Reverend is right there with us. So thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for all you do. Thank you. So I'm excited to be here with you all this morning. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take some time to talk about housing this morning. Yeah, now, I was afraid that might sound a little dry to some people, but good. And I thought what I'd do is I thought I'd start with a story about why this issue is so important to me. You know, I grew up out in Oklahoma, and I lived in one of those families that was a paycheck-to-paycheck family. We just kind of made it from here to there. It was my mama, my daddy, and my 3 older brothers. I was the baby sister. Now, the boys grew up and they left home, and after a lot of scrimping and saving, my parents eventually bought a home in the big city, Oklahoma City. And we were finally just starting to pull ahead a little bit. And then when I was 12 years old, my daddy had a heart attack. Now, he survived, but our world turned upside down. You know, he had a long time out of work. The bills piled up. We lost the family station wagon. And then my mom would put me to bed at night, and I'd hear her, after she closed the door, I'd hear her start to cry. She'd kiss me, she'd turn off the light, close the door, and then I'd hear her cry. And at first I didn't get it. Daddy, this was months after Daddy's heart attack. But then the words drifted through. Words like mortgage and the bank. And snips of questions like, where could we go? And would Bess and Stanley take us in? And I still remember the morning that I walked into my parents' bedroom and my mother had laid out her best black dress on the bed. Now you all know that black dress, you know, the one for weddings and funerals, the best one. She was 50 years old, she'd never had a job outside the house, and there she was, digging around in her drawers, pulling out her stockings, crying and talking to herself. Her hands were shaking and she just kept repeating, we will not lose this house, we will not lose this house. And I watched as she pulled on her dress and her high heels. I watched her blow her nose and put on her lipstick. And I stood on the porch as she walked off to the Sears Roebuck to get herself a minimum wage job. That minimum wage job saved our house. And more importantly, it saved our family. Yeah, because that's what happens. Now, I learned a lot that morning. I learned about women who do whatever it takes to save their families. That's what I learned. But I also learned that a house isn't just a place to live. This house was about dignity. And it was about my mother's determination to hang on to it. And I never forgot that day. Not ever. It was a long and bumpy road, but I eventually grew up. I got married at 19. I had babies. I went to college. I became a special needs teacher. I eventually became a professor, and I started teaching about economics and banking and money. And then I began to see how housing isn't just about the symbolic power of a home. It's also about the economic power that comes with home ownership. There is a reason why, for so many families, home ownership is the central star in the American dream. It is the single best way for middle-class families to build economic security. In fact, for working people, often it is the only way to build some economic security. You know, a house is an asset that you can pay down over time, and in that time, its value often appreciates. You can use it as financial leverage for things like sending a kid to college or starting a small business. It is the #1 retirement plan in America. Pay off the house and live on your Social Security. And if Grandma and Grandpa can hang on to it until it's paid off, they can pass it along to their kids and build real wealth for the next generation and the generation after that. So there it is. Retirement plan, investment options, safety net. Home ownership is a powerful thing in America. So if you want to understand the systematic disempowerment of African Americans throughout our history, here's a pretty good place to start. Until 1968, it was the official policy of the United States government to make it harder for black families to own their homes. I just want you to think about that. So the story behind that one is, starting in 1934, the Federal Housing Administration helped millions of white families finance their dreams by insuring their mortgages. But the government refused to do the same for qualified borrowers who lived in minority communities. And let's be really clear here. This wasn't like some loophole, some legislative oversight, something that was being exploited by just, you know, a few scurrilous racists that were buried somewhere in the federal bureaucracy. No, it was the law, open and right out there for anyone to see. So think about it this way. During one of the most consequential periods in the economic history of America, the time when America built a great middle class as we know it, the government put a sign on the door to economic opportunity reading, "Whites only." This was an attack on the dignity of black families, It was also an attack on black families' efforts to build a little economic power. And it was one more way to keep African Americans from becoming a fully equal part of America. Okay, so that's the story, but make no mistake about that story. That kind of discrimination didn't stop in 1968 when the rules on redlining were rolled back. No, it didn't stop. It didn't stop. No, those rules were replaced by other devices that kept discrimination alive and well. In the 1980s and the 1990s, Congress deregulated the banks and the thrifts and the savings and loans. And what that really meant was firing the cops who were supposed to make sure that the banks weren't cheating or discriminating against their customers. Now, before the crisis, those big financial institutions specifically targeted communities of color with mortgages that were full of tricks and traps. You know, these mortgages they were selling mortgages that were like grenades with the pins already pulled out. You didn't know exactly when they were going to explode, but believe me, they were going to explode. And when they did, millions of families across this country lost their homes. But the story gets even worse, because the big banks were so precise in their targeting those same communities of color that they got hit a second time when these neighborhoods were nearly destroyed by the concentration of foreclosures after the crash. Now, after the crisis, the Department of Justice went after banks like Wells Fargo for discrimination. But the problem is the damage was done at that point. According to Pew Research, after the crisis, families began to recover. Okay, so the crisis comes, blows everything up, people's wealth drops, a lot of folks lose their home, but families are starting to recover, just not black families. Between 2010 and 2013, the median wealth of white households grew by 2.4%. It's not fast, but it's moving up. It's on the right slope. The wealth of African American households in that same period of time fell by 33.7%. Think about that. In other words, while white families began to recover, black families fell further behind, and I mean they fell hard. Now, in the wake of the financial crisis, I went all around the country talking to people who'd been affected, people who were on the verge of losing their homes. And I heard a lot of stories as people fought so hard to hang on. They took on extra jobs, they borrowed money from distant relatives. I can't tell you how many women told me about selling their wedding rings to try to make a mortgage payment. And I have to say, I wondered how many 12-year-olds and younger heard their mothers cry at night. But you know what really gets me? The banks got caught discriminating. They paid fines, and then they just went right on with their business. Yeah. Bank of America paid $335 million to resolve allegations after President Obama's administration found out that its countrywide unit had engaged in a widespread pattern of discrimination against qualified African American and Hispanic borrowers. Think about that. There it is. It's right out there in the court records for anyone to see. Wells Fargo settled for $175 million after President Obama's administration found 34,000 examples of Wells Fargo charging African Americans and Hispanics higher fees and rates on mortgages compared with white borrowers with similar credit ratings. Yet another pivotal moment in our economic history where black families just got crushed. Okay, so now the financial crisis is in the rearview mirror. It's behind us, all right? We're 10 years past it. But boy, housing discrimination is not behind us. 50 years after the Fair Housing Act was passed, and black borrowers are still facing discrimination in buying homes. In 2015 and 2016, nearly 2/3 of mortgage lenders denied loans for people of color at higher rates than white people. What was happening with big lenders and small lenders, it was happening in every part of the country. In fact, a study just came out a few weeks ago that said in 61 different cities, minority borrowers were more likely to be denied a mortgage than white borrowers with the same income. And when black families get mortgages, they pay more for them. 23% of black homeowners had mortgage rates that were higher than 6%, compared to just 13% of white homeowners. And here's the deal. You do that to people on the single biggest asset that a family buys. You do it over and over and over. You do it in a community again and again and again. And the result is felt throughout the family, throughout the community. The results are unsurprising. And I'm going to give you just one example. At the end of 2017, the homeownership rate for white people in America was 73%. For black families, it was 42%. So there it is. Homeownership is the #1 way that working families build some wealth, the #1 way that working families protect themselves in stormy seas. But black families have consistently been discriminated against generation after generation, and the results are there for everyone to see. Yep, I'll give you one example that was published just recently, and it was published in the Boston Globe. The median net worth of a white family in Boston is $247,500. About $250,000, $247,500. For a black family, median net worth, family right in the middle, it's $8. $8. So I want you to think about what that means. Look, I get it. We are up against some really tough fights in this country. And I'm not here to tell you that housing discrimination is any more important or any less important than any other issue facing black America today. I know I haven't personally experienced the struggles of African American families, but I am here to say that no one can ignore what is happening in this country. That's why I'm here today. I'm here today to say you can't listen to these numbers, you can't hear these stories and stand silently by and let this happen. We must fight back, all of us. And that's why I'm here. I'm here because I believe in fighting back. I believe that when you see injustice, you stand up and you say something about it. That's why I'm here. And I believe in our getting together and strengthening each other. Now, so let me just say for a minute, let me remind ourselves, since we are together, let's remind each other of our values, of our collective fights, of our determination. Let's remember what it is that we believe in and what it is that we fight for. And let me start with the one we've just been talking about. We believe that cheating people, cheating them on mortgages or credit cards or payday loans or student loans is wrong, and Wall Street banks should be held accountable. Yeah. And let me double down on that. You know, we know that a kid who gets caught with a few ounces of pot can be sent to jail. Well, we believe that when CEOs break the law, they should go to jail just like they. And there is so much more. We believe that health care is a basic human right, and we will not let Republicans rip it away from millions of people. We will not let them repeal Obamacare. Can I have an amen? no one who works full-time should live in poverty, and that means raising the minimum wage. It's basic human dignity. We also believe that after a lifetime of hard work, people are entitled to retire with some respect. And that means strengthening and expanding Social Security and Medicare. Yeah. I must say one more. We believe that everyone should pay a fair share to keep our country running. And that $1.5 trillion Republican tax giveaway to their corporate donors and their billionaire buddies is corruption, plain and simple. Look, if there's $1.5 trillion to spend, let's use it to strengthen our schools or help our kids get through college, rebuild our roads and bridges and mass transit, and produce a lot of good paying jobs along the way. There's a lot we could do with $1.5 trillion. And we believe that immigration and diversity made this country strong. And that means stopping the Trump administration's hateful immigration policies, protecting our dreamers and their families, and we're ready to fight for them. You bet. You know I could do this all day. I just have to do one more though. I have to do one more. You bet. My kind of man over here. But one that's so important that we gotta say. We believe that racism and sexism and homophobia, that hatred and injustice and bigotry have no place in our country. We believe that Black Lives Matter, and we're not afraid to say so right out loud. Yeah. Fights that get us up in the morning and that keep us up late at night. But here's the deal. All our fights are interconnected. All of our fights are about making our government work, not just for a thin slice at the top, but making our government work for all of us. Yeah. All of our fights are about building a future not just for the kids born into wealth, but building a future for all of our kids. All of our fights are about the basic dignity of each one of us. I think of this as Matthew 25:40. Come on now.
All right now. If you ain't have my
you can always tell a Sunday school teacher. There we go. There we go. And old school. I still do King James. So. But I want you to think about it. When the Lord says, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto these, the least of my brethren, ye have done it unto me." When he says that, it's not just an admonition, be nice to each other. He says, when you've done it unto one of the least of these, you have done it unto me. And what that says is there is God in every one of us. There is value in every one of us. There is God in the hungry. There is God in the naked. There is God in those in prison. There is God in each and every one of us. And what the Lord says is he calls on us, not just to have a good heart. He calls on us not just to say, you know, I care about those folks.
Come on now.
No, he calls on us to act. He calls on us to act, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked,